Anderson, District 2, St. Joe, and Somerset Townships.
Ryan Shirley, District 13 in the city of New Richmond.
Community Development Director.
Heather Amos, Corporation Counsel.
Ken Witt, County Administrator.
Thank you. And then was brought to my attention before the meeting started that we forgot to record a vote in the minutes from last month, the 2-2 tie on bringing up the, I forget the name of the specific agenda item.
I'll do this.
Yeah.
It was the item number 9, consideration of proposed amendment to Chapter 11 manure storage facilities. We had a 2-2 vote, so motion failed.
It was just to whether to bring it back up.
Whether to bring it back
this month.
Yeah.
Yep. So we'll add that, and then is there any other additions to or changes to the minutes needed? All right. That being said, we'll let those stand like that. Public comment. We have Celeste Cobro. I tried it a few times. I still can't quite.
Bingo.
Yeah.
You got
Sweet.
it. I'm Celeste Cobrell, Town of Hudson. Briefly, I did email in a public comment on a business agenda, item 7, the resolution supporting an increase in base funding for St. Croix County conservation staffing. And just in brief, I strongly urge you to adopt that as presented. As I said in my comment, we had a chance to get hear a legislative briefing from Senator Staff Schultz and Representative Zimmerman, who are both on Joint Finance when they spoke at the Chamber of Commerce. They both said they are very strong advocates for the importance of maintaining clean water, and clean water is a nonpartisan issue. And afterward, I went up and talked with both of them, and so did some other people, about increasing funding in the state budget to the counties for the land and water conservation divisions. So I would urge you to reinforce that message by passing this resolution. I understand it's also supported this year by the Wisconsin Counties Association. The Wisconsin Farmers Union is working for it, and some other organizations across the state. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Sue Curtis. I live in the town of St. Joe, and I'm also here to speak on that resolution. And to me, it's really a big resolution. It seems like a legacy. And this resolution really does set the board up to continue for the trajectory of things to come, the good things to come, and it allows us to continue to see our children that are fishing, swimming, and all the other water activities in St. Croix County. It's really a water legacy, and it ensures that we'll have clean water for decades to come. We really know already that our St. Croix County waters are stressed, and they're impaired as classified on the Clean Water Act from excess nitrogen, phosphorus, and other toxins. We know that we have competent staff at our county, and we'd like to retain qualified and experienced competent staff. So creating an environment where they can be supported and thrive at work, and we can all work towards the same mission, because clean water is for everyone. It's a nonpartisan issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment today? Any other public comment? Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. We'll now move on to the public hearing for the Roberts Concrete / Samstone Ready Mix in the town of Richmond. Jason?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members of the board, thank you. So our staff went ahead and advertised the public hearing notice for tonight for the Samstone expansion. This was before the committee a couple months ago when they were zoning the property accordingly. But the town of Richmond and Samstone have a scheduled meeting coming up. And so the applicant and town would like this matter to be postponed for a month. And so we would suggest postponing this until the June 19th meeting. And then we will still notify all the adjoining property owners within 300 feet of that property with that new meeting date and time. So that would take care of your public hearing and your business item number 1.
Yep. Yes, please.
Move to postpone the application until the June meeting and for consideration of the conditional use request for Roberts Concrete Sunstone Ready Mix.
Second.
Support.
Supervisor Van Summeren with a second. Any discussion on the postponing? And this would be, to be clear, for the public hearing and also for business item number 1. All right. All those in favor of the postponement signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Now move to business item number 2, resolution approving the amendment to the Town of Hudson zoning ordinance.
Yep, I'll take that one too, Mr. Chair. So the town of Hudson has their own zoning ordinance, and under Wisconsin statute 60.62 parentheses 3, the county has to approve any zoning map amendments or zoning ordinance amendments. And so the town of Hudson has approved a youth-oriented recreational district. And the purpose of that new zoning district or classification is to establish areas for more active recreation, which may require equipment and is open to the public with or without entry or activity fees. This may include, but is not limited to, game courts, covered or uncovered ice hockey rinks, golf facilities, ball fields, and similar uses. So both the Planning Commission and the Town Board have approved of this. The process that they followed with the hearing notice and the final zoning ordinance text is in the packet. We don't have any problem with this change with the county's comprehensive plan, since it's just a use of the property.
Anyone want to make or have questions or want to make a motion? No.
I make a motion that we go along with this, with okaying their change.
You want to approve the resolution?
Yeah, approve the resolution. Thank
Okay.
you.
A second.
Second.
Thank you, Supervisor Rice. Any further discussion? Seems pretty straightforward. That we're ready for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. Carries unanimously. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 3, the consideration of the department fees forfeiture schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was on your agenda last month, and that for just open input. And this now is back as an action item or a voting item. And what this forfeiture schedule would allow the committee to do is you'd be able to change the forfeiture amounts, very similar to like the fee schedule of our department as well. But it does set minimum forfeiture amounts that are higher than our current forfeiture amount of $200, which when you add the court cost to the 200, it's $389.50. And those higher court amounts are based on the severity of the violation, or if there is a property that comes into violation, repeatedly, in that we could go even higher than what this schedule is. It's really a tool and that to try to take and get better compliance, quicker compliance, to make sure that it's a little bit more serious. So agenda item 3 and 4 are basically the same. The forfeiture schedule is number 3, and then we need to amend ordinance number 1, and that to take and reference the forfeiture schedule of community development. And so I'm going to jump ahead to that item just so that you can see the only change would be to cross out the $200 in ordinance number 1 and cite the forfeiture schedule of our department. I don't know if this forfeiture schedule would be something that you would, want to open up or go through very often, but at least it has that capability. It's something that will probably be very steady, though.
Yeah, it's something where you're not opening up the ordinance all the time.
Correct. You're not opening up the ordinance all the time. It's something that you can change more frequently, but definitely probably not on an annual basis. And all of those different forfeiture amounts are set by the state. And then based on the forfeiture amount, then the court costs are automatically calculated. So that determines the total citation amount. So you do have the ability to change the forfeiture amount. So it'd be right in this column here. And if you change it and say, let's say setback violations, I think that should be 250. And that then if we look up at here, you know, and that our court costs are going to jump to 202.50. So that's all automatically established based on the actual deposit of the forfeiture amount. Some of the big ones that we deal with a lot, junk violations, for example. So that one you can see is higher. The reason why that's higher is one, maybe a pollution concern, but also in that if you get a citation for $893, you might say, well, geez, the county means a little bit more business here than $389.50. If they're pumping their sewer, you know, and that improperly, you know, 767 versus just not taking and having it pumped, you know, is less. So you can see 389 just for not having it pumped on the normal 3-year cycle. But if you're pumping inappropriately, you're not fixing your failing sewer, that citation is more. So I think this is kind of what Supervisor Van Summeren had asked for several months ago. And we were waiting for Chapter 1 to kind of come through so that they could be partnered at the same time, so.
Any thoughts, questions, comments on even specific dollar values? Go ahead.
I have a question, Jason. What is improper disposal of domestic waste? Number 4 under the private wastewater treatment. Just
And that would be somebody pumping out their septic tank and that into the road ditch or into the wetland. So that would be what that is. Yep.
thank you.
Any comments on the table, the amounts, the schedule in general? Everything seems like the severity makes sense to me. I do need a motion.
I move to accept the proposal of the Community Development Department forfeiture schedule.
Supervisor Schroeder with the second. Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
I
All those opposed? None. Thank you. Now we'll go to continue with the ordinance amending Chapter 1. Seems pretty straightforward since we just adopted the forfeiture schedule. Anyone want to make a motion on that, Supervisor Shirley?
I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance amending Chapter 1 citations and general provisions for the St. Croix County Court of Ordinances.
Jared,
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
I
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. All right. Ken with the financial report. Or is it Jason? Jason's got it today.
Register of Deeds, leave that where it is. I don't oversee that. Recycling, though, you can see that we're in the hole there, but we did just get confirmation yesterday that we got our grant, and that's our annual grant. That is, I don't want to say a given in that, but generally we always get it. So it's right at 200,000. So our operating budget that we had was like 199. So it's within $1,000, and so that money will be coming the first part of June. Hazardous waste, I will just say, and that we've got a fairly good balance here. We started that hazardous waste voucher program, and that instead of doing the clean sweep because of the work that's going to happen out at the Hudson Highway shop, it's been going very well. We took and front loaded that fund, and that was some remaining funds from the last year. And we've got a lot of vouchers. People are taking advantage of that program very well. So. Parks Department, you're seeing some of this capital improvements in that we're making coming through. It's improved a little bit since then, but that number is in the red right now. I will say in that the campground is full Memorial Weekend out there, so we're getting a lot more campers now. It just started last weekend. Fairgrounds, EW Extension. Land and water, of course, that's always going to be in the red until we get reimbursed at the end of the year for a lot of our cost share funding and staffing as well. Planning, still in the red, not as bad as in the years past, but documents are trending about the same or a little bit higher than what we've seen. A lot of our expenses hit this account right away at the beginning of the year, so I'm hoping that number is going to improve throughout the year. A lot of that is software and stuff where they want their money right at the beginning of the year. Zoning department, and that so far permits and fees have been pretty solid. You can see that we're only about 50 to 60% from making budget, and we're only probably showing about 4 months out of the year here, so they're very strong again like we had last year, and so that one's in the black. And economic development, so that's what I've got for finance.
Any questions on the financial report? No. We're breezing right through. Discussion on the Chapter 17 proposed amendments, agenda item 6. That's you again.
Yeah, so this is me. So this is a little bit more time consuming. So Chapter 17 was the old county general zoning chapter prior to the comprehensive rewrite or amendment of the code that created Chapter 15. And so I don't know what the thought process was exactly at the time, but there was 3 subchapters that were left in Chapter 17, but a lot of these provisions are already duplicated in the other ordinances. So I'm just going to take and go one by one. This proposed Chapter 17.01 to 17.09 is general provisions, definitions, and most of those definitions that are crossed out are in one of the other ordinances already, so they're just duplicating. But all 3 of these subchapters, I've got this amendment key here, and you can see basically our normal cross out, and that text is to be removed, underlined is to be kept. And then I also identified the provisions that are not in NR 118, which is the administrative code for the St. Croix, because that's really with the text that you can change. So, but looking at this first section, general provisions, we've got that in all of the ordinances, so you can see that that is all struck. Definitions, when we get into that, a lot of this, like the A zones, that is a floodplain zoning term, and that is already covered under Chapter 18. So it's not like we're getting rid of that, but my goal with these 3 subchapters would be to take and combine it all into one Chapter 17, which would be basically the St. Croix ordinance, and that for the lower St. Croix. So these provisions like ag accessory building, that is all put into the Chapter 15 ordinance, for example. So the highlighting here, though, when we look at accessory structure, this definition matches the accessory structure definition in NR 118, except for the words impervious, pervious, or porous driveways. And so it probably doesn't mean a lot. But we were just a little bit more specific that it's, either pervious or impervious driveways are included, whereas NR 118 says only driveways, so it probably doesn't matter. Accessory use in NR 118 is defined as a use subordinate to and serving the principal use on the same lot and customarily incidental thereto. We've got the text, it must also be subordinate in area, the extent or the purpose of the principal building or use served. Accessory uses include but are not limited to family daycare, home occupations, and seasonal roadside stands. So any of this, yellow highlighted text, if you like it, we can leave it in there. If you don't, we can strike it. So do you want me to give you a little time on that, or?
What do you think? I think it's fine.
I think it could be struck. I don't know if that adds anything to it. I don't know if we need time on like this one. I think that's kind of, a driveway is a driveway, and I wouldn't have a problem striking that.
Both of them, you're saying?
Both of them.
Okay, what do you think?
I'm fine with it.
Yeah, strike them. What do you think, Supervisor Shirley?
I'm just trying to think, is there, in any of our districts, is there ever a case where the accessory use is also subordinate in area? Like in the
So-
ag district, you may have a barn that's bigger than,
That's basically all I can think of.
right,
Yep. A large pole shed that dwarfs the size of a house or the square footage of a house.
right. So I wouldn't mind striking that. I don't know that it's necessary.
All right, so I guess the conclusion is to strike them.
Yeah. And haven't heard anything where that's been an issue or anything, so probably not. Yep. And again, I apologize, and that for all the formatting here with the track changes, everything gets extra spaces and stuff, and you can't hardly remove it. So the definition of antenna here, I struck the old provision and I literally copied and pasted it out of NR 118, so you can see what that is defined as. I should add that this ordinance will have to be approved by the DNR, and we're probably gonna have to match the NR 118 definition on the minimum side, and that we can be more restrictive, more limiting if we want, but we're gonna have to meet the minimum, so I think we definitely need to keep that. Base zoning classification there, the underlying zoning district as outlined in the St. Croix County or Town General Zoning Ordinance instead of this citation. That way it's very general. Bed and breakfast is defined as by NR 118 as well, so just included that definition in here. Bluff line is something that would be relevant to the St. Croix ordinance, of course, and so currently it's defined as a line along the top of a slope preservation zone. There can be more than one bluff line. That is not in NR 118. I think it's fine to be in there, basically. So if you have the water here, you have a slope over 12%, which would be the slope preservation zone. You could have a bluff line there, but then if you have another stepped bluff, and that you could have another bluff line up on top. So, and really, it probably doesn't need to be there because we're gonna measure off from the top one anyway, and that's where anybody would be able to build, but there may be a weird case out there where it might apply. Leave it, okay. Again, 29, 34, 36 through 38, those are all definitions that we've got otherwise and not really needed for this ordinance. Cell tower stuff, we're not regulating that. Change the committee from the Planning and Zoning Committee to the Community Development Committee. Conditional use, change that so that that matched NR 118. Pretty self-explanatory, straightforward. All of these provisions, we've got them in the land division ordinance or general zoning. Again, more stuff out of chapter 15. Left in their deck, Department of Natural Resources, diameter of breast height is important to that because of the landscaping standards of that ordinance. District, don't really need that. Docks, piers, wharfs, of course, on the St. Croix are important. Drainage system, don't really need that. That's more ag land. Dry land access is a floodplain standard. All the dwelling provisions are a general zoning standard. Earth tone is needed because any development in the St. Croix area needs to have earth tone colors. Encroachment, I think that's kind of a general term. Everybody knows what that is. Expansion is important to keep. Again, general zoning provisions, floodplain provisions. Filtered view of the St. Croix is important. That's in NR 118 as well. A lot of flood hazard areas, flood FEMA stuff. Again, that's all in Chapter 18. So footprint, that is in NR 118 as well. So land area covered by structure at ground level measured on a horizontal plane. It does include attached garages, porches, but excludes decks, patios, carports, roof overhangs. A lot of that they consider accessory structures. Foundation, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. We had quite a few of these forest products processing and different, I'll call it silvicultural management practices. Some of them were in NR 118 for timber harvest on the bluff if there was anything done accordingly. But a lot of these were not. So I struck the ones that were not in NR 118, but if you want to keep them, you definitely can. So garages, group daycare. So a lot of these are more on the land use side. Historic structure, that is one of the things along the St. Croix that has special permits, ability to stay, and that ability to be a different color. So left that in there to really define what those historic structures are. Home occupation is in NR 118, which is kind of odd how NR 118 includes some uses, but it doesn't include a lot of the general uses. Human habitation, and that one was changed, and that because that is right out of NR 118, and we had some other habitable structure. So that was similar to 109, but I put it down here just to make it alphabetical. Regional flood heights, wetlands, recreational, all of these are Chapter 15, junkyard, salvage. Grading and filling for any land disturbing activities, probably still relevant around the bluffs. Land division is relevant, even though we've got Chapter 13, because NR 118 has special minimum lot sizes and that kind of stuff and widths, so that's still important. A lift, and that we're talking about shoreline lift or rail car, and that to go down to the water, so that's important. Again, a lot of general zoning stuff. The definition of lot, I took and deleted that whole chunk, and I pasted in our lot definition in Chapter 15 and Chapter 13 so that all of our ordinances are the same. So that's the exact same text as the other provisions that we've got. Lot lines, lot width, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Flood damage potential, again, floodplain. The riverway, and that is important here to have that defined. The management zone of the riverway is important. So mitigation, and that this is all in NR 118, but mitigation should compensate for loss of shoreline vegetation when development or improvements occur. That was not in NR 118. It's probably not a bad provision, but okay with leaving that in there? Okay. Mobile homes, model homes, modification, native vegetation, And so it's referring to the original 1830s map of Wisconsin. And I think if you looked at that 1830s map, it'd say that everything is prairie. And so I'm not sure that we can really establish prairie on the bluffs of the St. Croix, nor, and that is that, would that fit in and be normal to what's there currently? So that was the reason why I thought that didn't really fit. Again, in the general zoning area, that may be more appropriate, but new construction, of course, non-conforming structures is important. Again, a bunch of flood stuff, nursery, general zoning provisions. Ordinary high water mark, NR 118 also has this text that's underlined, so that was included. So that's where the bank or shore of any particular place of such character is difficult or impossible to ascertain where the point of the ordinary high water mark is, typically along a creek, river, etc. And that we can use the other bank of the stream and that to help place the ordinary high water mark. So a lot of times it can be hard to tell where that is exactly because there's a floodplain area, and that flooded area can have different vegetation and plants present than the upland area, but yet you still don't know if it's the main ordinary high. So probably needs to be there. Parking lot, I left that in there because it's considered an accessory structure as well, so that seemed like it should still remain. Person, porch, principal structure, principal use, left all of them. Public utilities are important because we've got special provisions for, power lines and stuff along the St. Croix where they get some special permissions to provide those utilities to the people in that area. This is more of a land division thing here with the quarter. Reasonable accommodation is in NR 118, so that's important. Reconstruction of non-conforming structures is talked about, so we needed to have definition 197 in there. The road classification systems, we removed this out of chapter 15 again. This is pretty much handled at the town level now, so that's the reason why all of this was struck. Or our highway department would also handle it on the county roads. Vegetation management, that is something in that we have rules for in the riverway. So left that in there. Not salvage operations or schools. Selection cutting. We had that up here, and it's just slightly different here. So copied that, I believe, yeah, and took and put it down here, so it's NR 118. It's very similar. Setback, shelter wood cut, that's in NR 118, believe it or not. Shoreline wetland, well, it's not, designated only as shoreline, and that those two provisions and that still would overlay with the Chapter 17 St. Croix ordinance. A lot of different uses. None of that is needed because that's going to be regulated by the town ordinance or by the county Chapter 15. Residence, I still left that in there because it talks about human habitation for one family. Slope preservation zone, again, that's that 12% slope for more than 50 feet. That designates that steepness or that area as the slope preservation zone. Small cut, and that one is in NR 118. I got some stuff in that for adult entertainment that it's not needed in the St. Croix Riverway ordinance. Start of construction, these were struck because basically we're trying to make it the same as all of our other ordinances. The permits are good as long as you start within 1 year of when the permit was issued and you complete within 2 years of when it was issued. So that's basically what I tried to make this sound like or say. So Structural alteration is important, structural components, erosion control measures, what a structure is. So like picnic tables, lawn chairs, grills, portable stuff like that is not included as a structure. Structure height measurement, so this is one, we took when we went over this with chapter 15, but basically that doing the average ground elevation to the highest point of the structure, that is a little bit different than chapter 15 because we go from the lowest elevation to the highest point, but NR 118 says that we do have to go from the average ground elevation up to the highest point of the structure. So it's very similar, just a little bit different. And then that would exclude chimneys, TV antennas, that kind of stuff we wouldn't measure to. Subdivision, that's in chapter 13, substantial damage, modification, that's a floodplain standard. Transmission services, again, that's going back to the utilities. Variance, basically that it deviates from any of the provisions of the ordinance. I'm not sure why it's just the dimensional standards and definitely not the uses. So the Board of Adjustment doesn't have the authority to grant use variance, which would be like, say, we set the maximum height of 35 feet. And that the board can't go to 45 feet, but they can do area variances, which is like a setback to a lot line or a setback to the bluff line, that kind of stuff. So, so this isn't changing any of that. It's still the same amount of authority of the Board of Adjustment through the statute. Visually inconspicuous is important. We deal with that all the time. Basically, that it's not able to be viewed from the midline of the St. Croix River. Wastewater treatment system, basically that's a pouch or a sewer system. Water surface profile, flood profile. We do use that along the St. Croix because being a river or a stream, believe it or not, you don't think about it, but they're always dropping in elevation because water runs downhill. And so those can be beneficial in that for determining the ordinary high water mark, and that if we can't determine it based on the bank or the trees, plants that are present. So that was the reason for keeping that. Wetland, and that's it. So I know I went through that pretty quick. Is there anything that you'd like to change or not have?
No, we did go through a lot of definitions there, though, that you took out. Amazing amount. Think of how hard some people worked to put those in there in days past.
Well, I may be an underachiever in that, but when I would have hit 80 definitions, I probably would have stopped. I wouldn't have went to 280. So, okay, so that is 17.01 to 17.09. And so my goal would be to combine that into that one master chapter 17 ordinance. But I just wanted to take and make sure that you guys could see how we're handling each one of these subchapters first before we put it into the document and actually combine it. I'm going to skip over 17.36 quick because the last one here, the 17.70 to 17.72, this is basically the administration and enforcement of the ordinances, and I can go down through it here, but this whole subchapter was removed from the ordinance because we've already got it under 17.36. We've already got it in chapter 15, 16, 18, et cetera. A lot of this doesn't even apply to how it's done now. It talks about the towns and having a deputy zoning administrator at the towns. That's not really how the statute reads, and that the towns that have their own zoning have their own zoning administrator. They don't have to report to the county at all, except for like the town of Hudson thing where we have to run that through the county board for a zoning map or a zoning ordinance amendment. So a lot of this doesn't apply. And it talks about enforcement. In the last year here, we've created that new enforcement policy, which we're following and using. So there's a lot of procedures in here, just like we cleaned up chapter 15. So I think all this is covered. Do you have any questions? Otherwise, I'll get into the Lower St. Croix Riverway ordinance in more depth. Good. Okay. So this is really ordinance that our staff use a lot. We got a lot of development along the St. Croix. So the key up here is the same as what we just went through at that first subchapter. So trying to clean this up a little bit. It hasn't been really amended since 2014, which was before that comprehensive amendment to Chapter 15 now, but it was originally enacted in 2005. So again, and that there's going to be some cleanup here with the table of contents. Once we know your feedback, this here is just going throughout removed subchapter because now it is going to be the chapter, and then removed zoning and that because it's not a zoning administrator anymore, it's a land use administrator is how our job descriptions are laid out. So this just generalize this instead of saying chapter 17, just referring to the county's code of ordinances. Change it to community development, crossed out subs again, St. Croix County land use ordinances, just more general. I crossed out 6 months here because statute actually says 180 days, so we're just trying to make it the same. Zoning versus land use administrator. The rock here, this was an NR 118 standard, so this is underneath permitted uses and structures. This is exactly what NR 118 says. Vegetation removal here is something that is not in NR 118, but I think it's good to stay. I don't see a problem with that. Number 8, governmental structures used as information centers or for resource management to improve the fish and wildlife habitat, provided they all meet other provisions of this chapter. I'm not sure that the DNR is going to allow us to keep that in there. It seems like we were kind of giving ourselves a free pass, but it's up to you on that provision. Again, and that if we leave it in there, the DNR might come back to us and say, yeah, you gotta strike that.
Do we have any current structures that would fall under?
The Eckert cabin would be probably one, because that'd be used as information centers. But that would be it.
Okay.
Thoughts? We got one for leave it in.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it in for now.
Fine.
If we have to strike it later, we'll strike it.
Okay. Accessory structures here, that definitely is not in NR 118. I believe that the DNR is definitely going to make us strike that. So I just don't see how they wouldn't. So change the Community Development Committee for CUPs. That's one of the main reasons why we're opening up this ordinance. So that's a big thing here. Also, PUDs or a planned cluster development for single-family homes is an allowed use as a conditional use. That's right in NR 118, so I put it right where it was. Minor home occupations per that provision of this ordinance. That's mainly highlighted because it's not in NR 118. No problem to take and leave it in there, but it's just more of a note for me to take and make sure that that citation is correct. Density standards, just changing the term here from parcel to lot. That really doesn't have an impact, but that's how we define it. We don't define a parcel, we define a lot. So that's just a little tweak there. Structure height's a big one though. So currently we've got the maximum height for principal structures in the rural residential management zone, which is basically all the rural area along the St. Croix River, and that shall be 35 feet. 35 feet is set by NR 118. And then the conservation management zone, and that shall be 25 feet. So these management zones were defined by the feds when this Riverway Act was created, I believe it was 1970. And so if you're in like a city of Hudson or something, then they've got more an urban planning zone as well. So those two are set at 25 and 35. The reason I struck principal structure, and that's really just a point of topic, and that is, do we want that to be for any structure, or the maximum height for an accessory structure in both zones shall be governed by the base zoning district, which when we went through chapter 15, now, and that we have a maximum height for accessory buildings higher. And so we are not allowed to permit accessory structures to be higher than 35 or 25. So that's where we can get rid of number 3 here, cross out principal, and it basically is the max that we're permitted in that underneath NR 118.
Makes sense to me.
Could I ask you a question? Second, so do these heights match the Minnesota side of the river? Are their heights the same, 25 and 35, or are we higher or lower, or is there consistency there? I'm just thinking there should be, if there isn't.
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly, Supervisor Van Summeren, but a lot of the lower St. Croix Riverway provisions don't apply to the Minnesota side. So, yep. So like if you look from the Wisconsin side over across, and that there's a lot more development, a lot closer. They're not following the same earth tone colors because they're not following the NR 118 provisions. So. Structure setbacks, and that I just added the exact date in here. That is in NR 118 versus the effective date of this subchapter or chapter. So I think that's easy. So the feedback I got from our land use team, and that the one thing that comes up that is not in NR 115 or 118 is side yard setbacks. And so right now, everything it has to be 25 feet from all exterior lot lines. And so remember when we were talking accessory structure, that included driveways, decks, patios, all that kind of stuff. And so that is a provision that we are over and above any requirement of NR 118. NR 118 doesn't address any side yard setbacks. So I don't know what your thoughts are, if that is acceptable, or if you'd like to separate it out to principal structure setback versus accessory structure setback, leave it as is, whatever. But that is one of the common issues that our staff has to deal with.
What is it in the other zoning districts?
And that, so in the other zoning classifications, and that were 10 feet for a principal structure from the side lot line and 5 feet for an accessory structure.
That's where the issue's coming in. People are used to the other zoning.
I guess I don't have a problem. Again, we're talking about the Riverway, a little extra space I think would be fine. If we can get by with that,
Yeah.
I'm okay with 25. I don't know about the rest of you.
You know how I think it got to be 25 is I think that was in the mono ordinance and that the DNR had at one time. And so it is pretty standard along the St. Croix to have that setback, and that we're not unique or overly restrictive, I'll say it, compared to other municipalities.
I guess my only thought is that, if this is the only spot that it's not the same as the rest of ours, 10 and 5, then that's where you're getting questions more on the staff side, so.
Even, I'll just elaborate a little bit more, I'll be a little bit more specific. It's mainly staff have issues with driveways. and that being, and that within that 25-foot setback, a lot of times there's a bluff or a ravine going down, and so they need to snake around in that in order to get to their home site. And so that's kind of where the issue is, and that they run into is being 25 feet. I don't think 25 feet for the accessory structure or for the dwelling has been as big of an issue as just a driveway.
I guess I don't see a huge reason to restrict a driveway specifically. Should we say 10 feet for driveways?
Do you mean as an additive to this 25 for structures, 10 feet for the driveway?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yeah, you think?
Well, the only thing I'm thinking of is the person who has an extra large camper that they park on there. And and now maybe it's white, so now all of a sudden it becomes a obstruction in the riverway. But, you know, I don't have a lot of problems with changing it to 10 either.
You wouldn't want to go much less than that because you don't want to take and create a problem for the neighboring property owner
Right.
with water runoff off the driveway. At least 10 feet gives them room. Also, we have snow plowing in the winter, so at least then the snow is stored on their property versus being pushed over onto the neighbor's property.
You want to
So-
say, 15? 15 seems like a good, little more room. Let's go 15 there. Yeah, just for driveways though.
15 feet for a
Yeah.
driveway?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So then, we'd probably add a number 4 and say driveway side yard setback of at least 15 feet from all exterior lot lines, and then we modify number 3 to be principal structure or accessory structure in that side yard setback, so.
Perfect.
The table here then, and that is kind of the same, just the height that we talked about above, just making it the max in NR 118, the 35 and 25. And then we talked about side yard setbacks, so I'll create another line down here for the driveway setback. Signs, and this cited a provision that we don't even have anymore. So we're in 17.36, we don't even have a 17.65. So I struck that and I copied the text right from NR 118. These are the provisions that they have, especially for signs in the riverway. Slope preservation zone was matching up with NR 118. This provision, so no filling and grading is allowed in the slope preservation zone that directly face and/or directly drain towards the river, except the minimum required for the installation of items in A above. And that's like riprap, docks, piers, wharfs, stairways, and lifts. So these are on basically the bluffs going down to the river, and we're saying that no filling and grading is allowed in those areas. So it's probably a good provision to have. And it could be shortened a little bit. That doesn't drain directly towards the river. That probably doesn't matter if it's on that kind of steep slopes. If it's on one of the ravines and it wraps around, you know, it might be running towards the road, but everything goes down into that ravine and into the river. But are we okay with keeping that? Okay. NR 118 talked about this here, that the structural erosion control measure is constructed outside of the slope preservation zone or a conditional use permit is obtained. So this does allow for a structural erosion control measure, riprap, et cetera, to be within the slope pres zone as long as they have a conditional use. So those would be coming to the committee. We would be able to do erosion control plan, that kind of stuff. This is required by NR 118, so. Land use versus zoning administrator. I thought this was kind of duplicated, so constructing, updating, and maintenance or reconstruction of structural erosion control measures in slope preservation zones is allowed by conditional use permit if all of the following. That was not in NR 118, and basically we got the same thing up here with just adding that line. Okay, then the administrative code comes out and they say that any structural erosion control measures within that slope preservation zone has to have the erosion control measures, will be constructed, what land will be disturbed and take place, any vegetation that will be removed, and how any new vegetation will be replanted or reestablished, and the detailed plans. We require the timelines and contact information for the plan. Again, probably not an issue. Erosion control plan, vegetation management plan. Several places through here, we have that the property owner shall execute and record an affidavit describing the approved, structural erosion control measure or the maintenance requirement in the Register of Deeds office. I don't know what the committee's thoughts are on that. Generally, I would say that, it probably doesn't help anything and that to be maintained or kept up in the future. But the idea of these affidavits would be as if the property is sold, that any new buyers would be at least notified that they're supposed to keep it. But again, I don't know if there's a lot of value there or not. It's still gonna come through our office as a complaint, and we are still gonna investigate it based on the conditional use permit action taken by the committee, and we're gonna follow up accordingly. So I personally am not a huge fan of affidavits because I think they're a promise and nobody ever follows up on them.
So it seems like the consensus here is that, agreeing with what you just said, that it's already part of a CUP that's being followed up on. This seems redundant,
Okay.
so we can strike it.
And I think these affidavits were probably more important too, I'll call it 10 years ago before we had all of our permits online where people are able to be on the GIS and pull up everything. I think back then, yes, and that these affidavits carried a lot more weight, but now with everything being electronic, probably not as important. Filling and grading there, that was just a grammatical thing. So now we're into filling and grading. And number 5, WDNR stormwater construction technical standards are implemented. And that one, I think, could actually be struck in that because and that number 6 is actually what NR 118 has as part of an erosion control plan. Wisconsin construction site best management practices are implemented. So it's very similar. It's just not on the stormwater side. Put it this way, you got to keep number 6. And so if you want to keep number 5, that kind of says the same thing, you can keep it, but otherwise you can strike it and just have 1.
Any opposition to striking?
Really doesn't make much difference there. Will the DNR let us take that one out of there, or do they like that in there? Do they like their name?
They're going to want us to have number 6 because that's what's in the
okay.
administrative code. So,
Then
yep.
erase number 5.
Erase
Okay.
5. Gone.
Okay. Rock riprap and shoreline protection. And so we've got a bunch of stuff in here about riprap. I think it's all pretty good. It's all for, soil conservation, stabilizing the bluffs. I think all of it can be kept up pretty easy, and that pretty easy for us to administer. If we were going to suggest anything, it'd probably be to strike that affidavit paragraph again. That's the same as what was up above.
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
On number 4, I've never seen one where you'd ever stabilize with mulch before. Wouldn't you always want either a native seed or a native vegetation in there?
Yeah, good. You'd like to strike mulch, or mulch on number 4?
I think so, yeah. Move the order in front of native vegetation.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if that,
Yep.
we would allow mulch, if mulch would do what it's supposed to do,
Right.
what we want it to do.
Right.
But not the vegetation, but I think or mulch.
And then I'm okay with striking the 6B, that whole section too.
The affidavit.
Yeah.
The ones highlighted.
Okay, so now we're into stormwater and erosion and sediment control plans. And so, believe it or not, NR 118, when protecting the water quality of the St. Croix River, doesn't address runoff at all. So they take and they talk about structure color, which really the color of the structure, what does that mean if it's already visually inconspicuous from the river? And that we talk about vegetation management. So before I get into this chapter too much, but there's a whole bunch of standards about having a professional engineer do it. Of course, BMPs to be followed. This is for a 1.5 inch rainfall event. So basically a lot of our stormwater development standards for land division are in here. So, but if you can bear with me just for a couple of minutes, I'd like to throw out something new. So I picked a site on the St. Croix down in the town of Troy. It's actually on Cove Road because these lots are smaller. And so this house here is roughly about 1,200 square feet. And then with a little bit of the garage and a little bit of the hardscape and stuff, and that, I think they're pretty close to about 15% impervious on the lot. And so that comes up, and it's 0.6 acres, and so I just rounded it off for easy numbers, and that to 26,000 square feet. And so this spreadsheet I used in my previous work, and we did hundreds of these, and that every year. And it was very easy for the contractors because they know the lot size from the GIS, so they type that in up here. And then that automatically calculates 15% impervious, which is the state shoreline zoning standard, and that what you're allowed on the lot. So just rounded off to 3,900. Again, the one on Cove Road is just kind of a good example of this. So then you take your 26,000 here minus the 3,900, and you come up with this 22,100. And so that automatically calculates this table here to be 26,000 square feet so that you have all the square feet of the lots accounted for. Okay, and then I know this is maybe a little bit more complicated than what it would need to be, but the A, B, C, and D, those are the hydric soil classifications, and that for the heaviness of the soil. So type A, think of that as like your beach sand, very permeable. If we get an inch of rain and you walk across the beach and that, you probably are not going to see any water ponded, you know. B's, those are going to be more like your loamy soils, still lighter black dirt. C's, you're starting to get into like your silty clays, and D is pretty much a straight clay in that category. So this is very similar to what we do for stormwater calculations, and that based on the soil type. And so then we've got some different categories here as far as the pervious areas or the non-impervious areas of the property, and it has different thresholds for the amount of infiltration that happens in open spaces, lawns, mold area, shrubs and that, and plantings, you know, mulched areas, all that would fit into here. And then your wooded areas where you got a lot of ground cover would be down in this area. And so then what you can actually do, and that is put in how much impervious is actually on the property. And so if I'm just gonna call this 5,000. And so if I do that, then I got to reduce this to 17,100. Or no, 21,000. Okay, so now I've got a completely mowed lot, but basically in both of these cases, but one only has the 3,900 square feet of impervious. The other one's got 5,000 because they're going to add on a 1,100 square foot garage, for example. And so what this does is it calculates this proposed LURR number, and that's just part of the formulas to take and actually help calculate the amount of gallons in that we need to take and retain for that development. And so, again, in our current ordinance, we're at, I think, 1.5 inches of rain. A 25-year, 24-hour storm for stormwater is about 4.7 inches for the county. We're kind of right on the line between 4.7 and 4.8. And so I used the smaller one because it's still significantly more than what we currently require. And so it's got a pre and a post-development cubic footage. Then it's got mitigation amount, or how much cubic feet that you need, and the number of gallons that would be required for that extra 1,100 square feet in a 4.7 inch rain event. So again, a normal property owner, a normal contractor can run these numbers, and they can play with them. I shouldn't say play with them, but actually break them down. So let's say that I take and I put 2,100 square feet in some shrub area, and so I drop this to actually 17,000, and I make 3,000 square feet of poor woods. And so my lot area is still the same. You can see that the LURR came up and that to being a lot closer here, and now I've only got to mitigate 500 gallons. And so now by doing this, you're giving people credit for not coming in and making their whole lot mowed grass. And that, so if they retain some woods, they retain some natural areas, and that now they don't have to mitigate, and they can still have more impervious because those areas are collecting and absorbing more water runoff. But they're still, to the point, or sorry, I added that, okay. So, but I'm just gonna remove that. Okay, so sorry, I'm doing this as I'm talking, but, so you can see here, we're back, and then they can simply hit calculate, and it gives them options to capture the extra runoff. And so the wet detention basin, that's basically your stormwater pond, 80 square feet, okay, that's 80 square feet. Full detainment, think of this as like a French drain and that, where it's a subgrade rock infiltration pit. You take and dig the hole, line it with fabric, and then you fill it with rock. Now, you can see that one, and that is slightly bigger because of the rock infiltration, and the stormwater basin is 3 feet deep, whereas this is a cubic footage volume. And then, so that's basically 12 inches figured. And then the actual rain garden is 4 inches, so that's about a third again of this. But now you've got mulch and you've got plants and stuff like that that take up a lot more of that void space. So that goes up to 1,000 square feet. So I know I got off topic here a little bit, but it really goes back to the ordinance. And do we want to stay with like a stormwater management plan? Because I would see that this runoff calculation or the stormwater management should be the same in the shoreland area as it is in the St. Croix. And so that's why I bring this up as just a point of conversation right now. I don't care either way, but the other way, you're actually capturing more runoff on site, possibly preventing it from getting into the bluffs, creating more erosion, going into the river. And they don't need engineered plans for this, so it'd be cheaper for the property owner to do. It would speed up our office's review of permits. We'd be able to turn them around faster. And so that would be the positive side. However, the drawback side would be that you would not have a professional engineer and that providing plans and stamping, and so that would be the downside. There's major formulas here on that are, calculating all of this to make it happen. So this is what it currently says. Of course, you know, and that I would keep some of these provisions. If you did decide to do that runoff model and that, I mean, we would still want to follow BMPs. We would still want a lot of the information on the erosion control plans, you know, so a lot of this would stay. And that I just wanted to pitch that idea at one point.
I like that. I like the spreadsheet part because it actually helps the homeowner there too. I think that's a good thing. But you're going to have some pretty comprehensive instructions as to what they're actually dealing with. But I think would like to see that incorporated with whatever ones of these we don't need. I think that's a good thing. If it speeds up, expedites our portion of getting that, that's all the better.
Yeah, so we use this more for like a performance-based, you know, a much more performance-based, and that you can spend $10,000 on engineered plans. Well, but we got this, you know, cheat sheet, and it was designed by an engineer, it wasn't designed by me. But we got this cheat sheet that basically does all the hard math for you, and then you're getting more bang for your buck, if you will, because instead of those plans, and we know it's hard to find engineers, they're backlogged, so now all of a sudden I want to do this project, and now I got 2 months to get that engineered plan. We'd probably rather see the practices happening on the landscape. And so one of the things I would consider, and that is that you could probably have, you know, any new impervious that would be directly draining to the St. Croix, that they would have to do this calculation. It wouldn't necessarily have to be tied to the 15% threshold. So basically, at the end of the day, then, and that whatever the actual ordinance was approved or adopted, you shouldn't be providing any more runoff from that point to the river, and that we would be basically balancing whatever impacts or change there is with them capturing all of their runoff. Yeah, Supervisor Rice.
Jason, could you pull up that worksheet again?
Yep.
You were assuming, I think, a 4.7 inches.
Yeah.
What
Yep.
happens to this whole thing if you put in 7.5? Does it recalculate all these? The reason I ask is I was actually in a rain event like 30 years ago in St. Paul in downtown and got trapped for hours because the sewer caps were coming off like this. I worked late on a thunderstorm night, and we had one of those events where it was training through, which we know happens. So what this would give me if I were the homeowner living in the River Valley, an additional calculation about how I might be able to capture more of the runoff.
Yep. So it went from 1,800 gallons to 3,900 gallons.
Okay.
It's simply calculating the amount of water, so like 7.5 inches of rainwater over that square foot, and basically converting that to gallons. That's all it's doing. So, but then the top portion, and that is tied to these infiltration ratios, I'll call them, and that for the various types of cover. And so we know that, you know, a prairie or a deep-rooted native area, you know, absorbs all the water. It doesn't shed much off at all. However, and that if you got really good woods with a lot of ground cover, grass or clovers in that, probably doesn't shed much off either. But if you don't have any ground cover, you don't have any leaf litter on the ground, and it's just black dirt, it's probably very poor. So it kind of rates it. And so this is kind of on the honor system. But yes, and that I've got all the instructions and how you tell which category you're in and stuff. So I just threw it out there. I wanted to throw it out there just to kind of see what the feedback was.
This to me seems a lot more intuitive and cost effective and like landowner friendly.
Yeah, educational.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, because right now with the stormwater plan, and that they generally don't take into account the grass and stuff and that on the site. They're looking at the impervious, and so this way, it really rewards people for maintaining that natural state or the natural vegetation on their lot.
I'm just trying to think of a time that we're gonna have somebody that's gonna do a project in this area that isn't gonna, how is it gonna help them get plans done faster if they're doing a project when they're gonna need civil design on other items anyway. And they're just not, they're not gonna have civil, design, just the stormwater portion of it, because we're still gonna require it for other parts, correct?
The stormwater portion and that would not be required, so it'd be replaced with this tool.
But they'd still be required to have civil design on other parts of the project, right? Just not the stormwater.
Potentially, in that, depending on like soil erosion control measures or something like that, if you had those engineered plans and that. But let's say that they want to build a garage and it's not even close, they could just do this. They wouldn't have to go through a full PE and a fully PE plan.
Okay.
So where the 15% comes from, again, that's the state shoreline zoning standard, so you're allowed that, and then the state standard says you gotta mitigate anything over 15%. And so we could leave that and keep it the same in the St. Croix as well, or we could just, like I said, throw it out there as an option. You could say, hey, we wanna take and have no new runoff going to the St. Croix. We want anything that's gonna directly drain or end up draining to the St. Croix to be mitigated. And these amounts here really are not that hard to get because you don't, I mean, it's, and I should have clarified, it's not all of these options, it's pick one of these options or prorate these options and that, so you could do 40% rain garden, 60% full detainment, you know, whatever it works out. The reason why we had several different categories is because there's areas that we might hit bedrock and we don't even have 3 feet of depth. And that, well, that's not an option then. Now we need to look at full detainment. Well, that's gonna take a really big area, so that maybe doesn't work. And that maybe the rain gardens is the best bang for the buck then. So the property owner has the opportunity to select what they wanna do on their property this way too.
Yeah.
What I like about this, and I don't know how to take all of this and reduce it into words, is it seems highly customizable. And what we've seen here presented, playing on the board is that, what happens on my property 3 blocks down might be very different because of what happens, that I can't see the nature of the gravel underneath, the rock underneath. And it can change so much. This seems like custom.
Yeah. And you get rid of the water on site instead of sending it a half a mile through a subdivision or a housing development, because anytime you move that water, even if it's in a drainage easement, you have risk of erosion and stuff like that, which is why we have the ponds where if you, I mean, if it can come off the roof and go right in, a lot of times even, it's just a simple design change on, say I built a garage and you have your eaves coming down, and a lot of people like to have washed rock around the perimeter of the building. Well, instead of only doing it 2-3 inches thick just for landscaping, and that maybe you take and slope the bottom of it so that the water runs away from the foundation of the building, but now you can do it, a foot deep or 18 inches deep, and that helps you hit your calculation.
Yeah, I like this a lot better myself, and seems to be the consensus here.
Okay.
However you wordsmith it,
So,
look at
yep,
it then.
but like I said, I'll try to keep everything pretty much in this stormwater, about following BMPs, 5 feet of separation and that to bedrock. I'll try to keep all these in there as much as possible, and basically it would just replace and that the engineered stormwater plan with that runoff calc, so. And then that would probably be the same in the shoreland area as well. Okay. All right, moving back on. Vegetation management, we're actually a little less restrictive than NR 118. 40 feet landward of the bluff line shall be left undisturbed, so we had to put that in there for NR 118. We didn't talk about pruning of trees and shrubs to improve their health. That is in NR 118, so I included that here. Also removing dangerous and imminent safety concerns. Conservation management zones may not be expanded, so this is pretty much all NR 118. This is an NR 118 forward stewardship plans prepared shall be implemented and employed commonly accepted silviculture practices. Department forester, that'd be a DNR forester in that, so that's important. Tree replacement schedule here, that is not in NR 118 directly, but it's pretty common practice. It's not too excessive. The administrative code is no longer the Department of Commerce or COM 83. It's the Department of Safety and Professional Services 383. And then instead of citing Chapter 12, because that's going to all change with Muni Code, I just said the St. Croix County Sanitary Ordinance. Yeah.
Jason, could you explain the tree replacement schedule and what the purpose of that is?
Yeah, so let's say that we get a complaint that somebody's cutting trees on the bluff of the St. Croix. And so when we go out there, and that we would have to probably guess, and that because the trees are probably already cut by then, but the stump size, so at breast height, they're roughly 4 feet above ground, and that if you're talking a 12-inch tree, or I'm gonna do 11-inch tree, you'd have to replace 3 trees for that one tree. And that if you cut that big oak that's, 32 inches, you'd have to replace 10 trees, and that for cutting that one tree.
So these would be trees that hadn't been planted by an owner, but were just naturally occurring? Is that what we're talking about?
Correct, yep,
Okay. All right, I see.
so. So this is already covered, number 5 up above, and so it's not in NR 118, and we already have that stormwater management section, so really didn't think that was needed. Wireless communication facilities, maintenance and construction, everything here is not in NR 118. However, it gives the local utility and transmission companies some flexibility for some maintenance of their easements and right-of-way for their overhead lines. So I think it's all very good. Stairways, talking about the handrails on the stairway being painted or staying the same color as the stairway itself. So if you got brown steps, you can't have a chrome, or a stainless handrail. That's not in there. You okay with leaving that? So
I guess I don't see why that should have to be in there if I want a different colored handrails.
Okay.
What's the big deal? I mean, I think you could drop that out of there.
okay.
Yeah.
That's the consensus.
Would many chapters back or paragraphs back, there was a reference to being kind of natural colors.
Yep.
So would that not apply? I mean, if I decided to, just for example, paint it pink, would
Has
be
to be
governed
earth tone.
earlier?
Yep.
It has to be
earth
natural
tone.
colors.
Yep.
Okay. It
So
does-
if you had brown steps, you could have a forest green handrail.
yeah, okay.
So, yep,
All right, thank you.
okay.
Yeah, I'm guessing, Carrie, if you painted it pink, your neighbors would take care of that?
Okay, number 10, vegetation shall be effectively screening the stairways from the river within 5 years. That's a provision that we've got, not in the administrative code.
I don't think I care if it's earth tone, to be honest.
I agree. The luck I have with growing vegetation, probably take 55 years to get it covered.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we should, if that's necessary.
Consensus?
Especially if Carrie paints her railing pink, we'd like the world to see that.
Yeah, I think we should strike it. Any disagreement with that?
Okay.
Okay, let's strike that.
Number 13, a plan shall be submitted to the land use administrator and certified by a registered professional engineer or architect showing that the stairway components are securely anchored to prevent them from shifting and from causing accelerated erosion. So they already have to have an erosion control plan for installing and at the lift. It's just, do you want like the post and that to be engineered?
Would they need a building permit to build that? Because then the inspector would inspect that, if they need that, but I'm not certain, that's why I asked.
I believe the answer is gonna be yes, because they're gonna have electric to it. So I'm not sure that the building inspector is gonna inspect the footings though, because he's gonna be inspecting the electrical. So, back in 2021, anything electrical now needs a permit and to be inspected in the state. And so that would be done, but not the footing size necessarily.
So the footing wouldn't be considered structure? Yeah, I guess that's how I would see it, that would be.
I could
it
check
would-
on
would
that
follow
for-
it would follow the
If it was
permit.
an accessory building with electric in it, definitely, they would need, and that would be a full building permit on the whole structure and stuff. I just don't know how, lift would be handled.
If it wouldn't originally be done by inspector, could we say an inspector could sign off on that instead of have it called out specifically instead of an architect or a engineer?
So, I mean, we could get rid of everything and that up to the here. The stairway components are securely anchored to prevent them from shifting and causing accelerated erosion. And then you kind of leave it open-ended. Just a thought.
I'd be okay with that. I would. Again, I agree with you, Sean, about needing to get an engineer to do this now. Now suddenly, the $10,000 building is at $15,000 or 20, so I'd think so.
I was just going to say that, when I think about the anchor part at the very bottom, and that'd be, generally they're not in the water, but if we have a big water event, the St. Croix could rise rapidly, and that would be the thing that would be the weakest part of it. So having it inspected to make sure there's proper footings makes sense to me.
And on that topic too, in that they cannot put it in the floodplain. So that bottom platform has to be above and that the regional base flood elevation, so.
Now, you are gonna, if you strike the professional engineer and architect, the land use administrator then has to determine whether it's securely anchored. So the homeowner's gonna go, well, this is what I'm doing, and then you're relying on that staff member then to make a judgment call. Do I think that's securely anchored or do I not? Rather than just relying on a professional certification of it. So just understand the choice you're making there.
I guess to me that standard would be based on like deck building basically, right?
Most of these are probably installed by the
By the
lift
company,
company,
anyway.
that,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
that's generally how it.
Are you talking about stairways or lifts?
Lifts.
Lifts is the next section.
Oh, sorry, stairways, yep.
Mhm.
We got the same provision in the lift category.
Often stairways accompany lifts. Yeah.
So are we saying this is only when they're putting in a new stairway? Or what happens when they want to resurface the stairway, or if it's made out of wood, they need to redo the wood on the stairway? Are we saying that they need to get an architect to show that they're putting that in correctly?
I would say it will only be on the new ones and that to be installed. But I mean, that's a fine line, if I have timber steps going down to the river, when is it just maintenance and repair by replacing the timbers and when is it, So that, I mean, there's gonna have to be some judgment call by the land use administrator.
Yeah, but if it has already endured the way it's built, until it needs new wood. It's been there a long time. It's probably gonna last a long time. Again, must be well built, is my point.
Yeah, I don't think we're in agreement here that it doesn't have to be a PE necessarily.
Okay, we'll modify it.
And if it becomes an issue or a burden, we can bring it up again, but
Yeah, we haven't had any stairs floating down the river or anything that I'm
yeah,
aware of. so.
yeah.
Okay, lifts now, and that no lift shall be designed for the transport of boats or machinery up and down the bluff face. So that's not in NR 118. Administratively in that one might be a hard one for us to enforce because we're not gonna be out there all the time. And if they transport a kayak, which could be a boat or a paddleboard up and down, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that really affects anything with the St. Croix.
I think it'd be pretty natural for someone to throw a kayak on their back and get in one, to be honest with you. I think if we just put the word of motorized, something like that in there.
So like motorized boats, so if I just put right after of motorized,
Yeah.
But you can't really put motorized and leave with the machinery, because maybe it's a blower to blow off the deck at the bottom, or a weed whip to whip, that would be a motorized. So then you wouldn't be able to take that down in your lift. You'd have to fly that down with a helicopter or whatever, float it in. We kind of have to be careful of how we do that.
How about motorized water transportation? Or
There you go.
something like that.
There you go.
Yeah. And then we just strike machinery. Yeah. Because I don't care if someone uses it to bring a couple £100 generator down. That's like, you know what I mean?
okay.
If someone cares that much to do it that way, then all the power. Everybody will for sure, but cover the 99%,
So to kind of speed it up, the vegetation we talked about with the stairways, do you have the same opinion on that and the same opinion on number 10? Okay. Public and private roads, this is the same. Bed and breakfast, the same. Home occupations, this was copy and pasted out of NR 118, so it made the formatting a little wonky. Nature orientated, educational, and nonprofit, that's in NR 118 too. Non-conforming uses requirements shall take precedence over general zoning requirements for non-conforming uses in the Riverway District. I struck that, that's not an NR 118, and that could actually tie your hands through the general zoning ordinance if you have a non-conforming use, and that because NR 118 doesn't deal much with uses, so. And then an increase in the volume or use, or structure used for the non-conforming use are not expanded or enlarged, or if the owner provides a site plan and photographs of the site to the land use administrator to be kept in a property file at the planning and zoning department. That should be community development department if we're gonna keep it. But that's basically trying to document in that what the non-conforming use is or was at one time. Keep it, just update planning and zoning. Okay. And then in A here, non-conforming principal structures should take precedence over the general zoning requirements for non-conforming structures, except for those are more restrictive. I mean, whatever we do in that, the more restrictive ordinance provision is gonna be what's gonna apply, so it's probably just not needed, it's extra text. So pretty much simple here, just citing SPS 383 for the sanitary ordinance or administrative code. For approval and modification prior to the issuance of a permit for structural alteration or reconstruction. So basically if they need to take and replace a foundation wall, or they might have an erosion control plan needed. All this is pretty much status quo to NR 118, just clearing up SPS again. This table here is all summarizing what's above, so just got rid of that. Some small typos. Okay, mitigation, so we can jump to B, all trees shall be at least 2 inches in diameter at breast height and planted no more than 12 feet apart. And then the provision that is not in NR 118 is and parallel to the river and the structures they screen. To allow for future growth, these trees may be planted at different locations and staggered between the structures and the river. Keep it? Okay. Prior to the issuance of a permit, a stormwater management plan and erosion control plan shall be submitted. I think that's fine, and that's just not in NR 118. Bunch of land use. So conditional use and variance procedures. I didn't know exactly what to call it because conditional use and variances are tied together, and because variances are going to the Board of Adjustment, conditional uses are coming and that to the committee here. I just called it local zoning authority. So, and that is actually what NR 118 calls it too. So, and then this is just subjective, I think, for the zoning administrator and probably common sense. I mean, if we're gonna request additional information on the application, obviously, we're gonna get it prior to the issuance of a permit or approval of a variance. Okay, so applications for a permit for stairways and lifts shall include a plan, and then the plan shall be approved, modified, approved by a local governmental unit incorporated into the conditional use permit. That may be common sense, but that is what NR 118 says. Reasonable accommodation, when we were going through the definitions, I said we needed to keep that because we do have a section on what a reasonable accommodation is. So here, applications for text amendments or rezonings, maps amendment shall include a survey or a scale drawing showing the property location, boundaries, dimensions. Some of this isn't needing to be certified by an engineer. So just land use and zoning, public hearing procedures. Here, decisions, instead of just citing the Board of Adjustment, I said the board or the committee shall be in the form of a written decision. And then board or committee chairperson, so that's that change. Expiration, and that again, just keeping it simple, 1 year to start, and that from approval, 2 years, and that to complete. Compliance and revocation to match Chapter 15, where the terms or conditions on any permit, conditional use, or variance are violated, the permit, conditional use, or variance shall be deemed revoked. So previously, we've had these violations come to our staff, and then we have to schedule a public hearing, and that with the Board of Adjustment, and that they can get a lot of public and that involved. Whereas in reality, they deem the conditions of their permit. So this way here, and that it gives staff the authority to move on with it for the enforcement. And then sub K, and that is just the description of the boundary set by the feds back in 1970. And that is the ordinance, so. Any other comments or suggestions? Our hands are kind of tied with NR 118. I also wanted to take and go through and do this highlighting and that with NR 118 because I'm hoping that this will help the DNR speed up their review. I'm going to try to take and see if we can't get it back in time for the July Community Development Committee, but we don't have a lot of control over how fast this would go. Depending on what the comments are from the DNR, if there's anything substantial, I'd want to bring that back to the committee prior to setting the public hearing. If we don't have a lot of changes in that, because we're pretty much NR 118 here, we would just move on and schedule the public hearing on this ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's that one, I don't even remember the thing we talked about earlier with the DNR might scoff at. Oh, the one where it seemed like we were able to skirt it a little bit. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
educational structures and stuff.
Yep.
If that's obviously if that's like the only change, you're probably good to go with the public hearing. But I'm just repeating what you said now.
Yeah, no. Okay, so we'll make these changes and we'll get it sent off to the DNR and that in the next few days.
Perfect. Anything else in chapter 17? You think we're good to go? Think we're good with what we discussed? Seemed pretty straightforward. All right, agenda item 7, resolution supporting an increase in base funding for the St. Croix County Conservation Staffing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Rice and Supervisor Van Summeren had seen the resolution that Dunn County had passed or adopted for the Wisconsin Land Plus Water Association, and that for the state budget. And so, as you know, we don't have a lot of control over the state budget and what they do. So this is basically just a resolution supporting the idea of trying to get more funding for the land and water conservation departments across the whole state. This would not be just specifically for St. Croix County, it'd be statewide. The county board did a priority setting in December, and that's when this back wall here was set up with all the various priorities. The county land and water funding, and that was one of the priorities that had pretty good support, if I remember right. But it didn't make the final cut for one of the priorities. And so the Wisconsin Land Plus Water Association, is seeking the full 20.2 million. And so I got their budget priority sheet here. And so that amount is really what they're requesting. You can see historically, since 2006, their base funding level was 9.3 million. In 2025 here, the base funding is currently 8.9 million, and then they've got this one-time funding or supplemental income that goes to about 11.2 million. And so this is really to help cover county conservation staff. And so when we look at our conservation department, our land and water administrator, their wages are covered 100% in our grant application, or that's what we apply for. Then our second highest paid position is covered at 75%. So that's what we submit that one for. Our third one is 50%. And so that's what, so if we were covered and that those dollar amounts at 70%, and that would be what it originally was back in 2006. And right now, it's not keeping up just because of staff inflation and stuff, and that just to keep competitive. And so the amount needed, and I credit Tim Stieber here for putting these numbers together, to maintain that same 70% compared to the 44%, which would be what the state is currently operating at, would be about 14.4 million annually. And so that's kind of a middle ground, but I mean, if you're gonna put the 2006 number into today's wages across the state, that would be the number. Of course, like the county and like any other form of government, I'm sure the state has a lot of different budget priorities. But if there was support for this, then that would go to the full county board, and then, St. Croix County would be making a statement that, no, this is one of our priorities.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the resolution supporting an increase in base funding for St. Croix County Conservation Staffing as submitted.
I'll second.
Right, the one, I guess, discussion point I have is, I would love if we got that funding. It's symbolic request, right? It doesn't actually change what, it doesn't have an effective, I guess, enforcement mechanism or anything that will formally change anything. That makes sense? Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I would also speak, as Jason sort of started, on the timing. So WCA comes up with all their legislative issues. They had about 100 of them. We went through our exercise in December. We took the top 6 from that, and we went to 2 different WCA legislative days in January and February. And we met with all of our legislators in person. Greg Telejohn was there. I was there. Bob Fiedler was there. And we met with the legislators and talked to them about the top priorities that the county had. So that's probably the right timing for doing something like this. Because right now, if you take this to the June County Board, by the time you get it, the budget process is too far along at this point where they're going to take any written resolution into consideration. Your best bet is we establish the priorities in December before the biennial budget. We meet with the legislators early in the year before they get very far into it, and that's where you're going to have your biggest impact. Not that I'm opposed to this at all. I think it'd be great if we got additional funding. I'm all for that. You're just not going to make an impact at this time of year with this format.
Yeah, so I guess, would it be worth, I guess, tabling this, let's say, until October of '26, for example, when the next budget cycle is coming up? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate Ken managing our expectations, but I think the time is now. We need to get this in front of them. And we've done other resolutions that appear to me to be more of a gesture when asking for them to consider, placing, I can't remember what it was, a healthcare facility or what it was, in more close, over which we have no control. I haven't heard the outcome of that. I'm ready to be disappointed, but I also think that there's something about persistence, and I think we put it out there in front of our county board, we make our case and see if we can get support that way and start the process.
I would also hate for this to be one of those things where they distribute it what they view as equitably and we end up getting less money or the funding increases, but we get none of it, which has happened before, correct? Yeah.
Well, I would just say, I was at the meeting that was referenced in public comment earlier with Senator Staffschild and Representative Zimmerman, and in a side conversation, Senator Staffschild shared with me that he himself has excessive nitrates in his water, and he's going to have to do something about it. So, I think it's personal for them as well. They recognize that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And so if we're not successful this time, we just come back another time. But, it's a part of what I'm seeing is there needs to be a common awareness. When people find out about what the risks are to groundwater and surface waters, they get pretty surprised. And we have a local group that's going to be holding some events to increase awareness. So I'd like to see us move forward on this.
Is there anything wrong with bringing it up twice? If it doesn't pass the first time, can we, this is kind of like you said, Jeremy, it's kind of like asking, not knowing what we're going to get, but we're asking it. But if we don't ask, we know we won't get. And if we do ask, we might get. And I guess I'm okay with might get.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to tell you to vote for it or not vote for it. As Supervisor Rice, I'm just managing your expectations. So.
I appreciate the managing expectations, but I want you to know one of my kids' favorite books, please bear with me, was Green Eggs and Ham. And how many times did Sam ask, would you try green eggs and ham? And the answer is 14. And that's why my son never takes no for an answer. I think I blame myself. But this is not something that's going to go away. We're gonna keep at it. And It's, if not this year, next year, but I think we need to keep it in front of our legislators.
Any other thoughts on this? I don't, I don't think anyone is against the increased funding. It's just the method, right? Go ahead.
I would agree. I don't think anybody's against the increased funding. I'd love to see the funding as well. I agree with Administrator Witt that the timing isn't great. You know, it's not, looking at the whole state budget, there are so many higher priorities. The chances of this making their cut, it didn't make our cut, let alone theirs. And the stuff that we're already asking is was a higher priority to all of us that were here in this room at that time. But I'm not saying that it's unworthy or not, but again, I'm not really sure which way to go on this, because I think that if you were to pass this through, I don't think at this time of the budget process, it's gonna bounce right off the back wall. I don't think anybody's gonna pay attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, would you rather have this or the increase or the coverage from the state for the out of home child placements, right? Like that is a much less predictable thing that's assigned by a state, as well as circuit court judge, but paid by the state and demanded by the state per state statute, right? But yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Just using that example, our out-of-home placement is, as I understand it from the last meeting, is about half of what it was 24 months ago. Is that right? So,
The numbers, but not the money.
Right.
Unfortunately,
all right, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, on a positive note, well, maybe positive, but the early things that the legislature has said that they're cutting from the governor's budget was one of our top priorities, the court funding, which is what WCA pushed really hard. They've cut that, although they said maybe there's some money there. This provision, which was in the governor's budget also, has not been cut from the legislator's early cuts. So there's still a chance that this is going to happen. My only point was it's probably too late to influence the process. There's a chance. Not with a fox, not in a box.
On the resolution, that will take a vote, and I suppose we'll do a roll call for this one.
Supervisor Rice?
Yes.
Supervisor Shirley? Supervisor Van Sumeren? And Chairman Anderson?
No.
Tie vote. Motion fails.
I'm not gonna close the agenda item yet. I'm gonna do a motion to reconsider in November of 2026 unless the funding goes through this budget cycle. I'm gonna make a motion to reconsider in November of
I'll
2026.
second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
One.
Sure.
How do we keep track of those? Does that staff take care of that for us? Is it, never mind. All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. This committee will see you back in 26. Thank you. All right, now an update on the Xcel Energy project in St. Croix County.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have a lot to update the committee on, but Xcel Energy has told us that they intend to release a map of the proposed project area around Memorial Weekend, which is coming up fast. I haven't heard anything lately from them besides that. We had planned a joint municipal meeting in April, because the county board had asked us that back in January when Excel presented to the county board. However, we wanted to make sure we knew where that project area was so that we could incorporate all the appropriate municipalities. And so, once we have that map, we intend to take and schedule that meeting with the munis and get their input on the joint development agreement, whatever that might be. Excel has also backed off on their time frame for submitting to the Public Service Commission until all they've told us is by the end of the year. They're hoping that's not the last day of the year and that, but it's probably not gonna be September either. It's probably gonna be December sometime. So if it doesn't get pushed back again. So that's all we know. At the last meeting, we had talked about the town of Baldwin had that moratorium. I have not heard of any other moratoriums going on. I do know that there is a couple other town committees out there and that are talking about this project, but that's all I know.
Yeah, go ahead, Shirley.
So if they're telling us Memorial Day for the maps, that means the earliest they could submit would be 60 days after, right?
Correct.
I mean, we all have concerns, but what's been voiced already, probably. Anything else on this agenda item? Doesn't look like it. All right, request for future agenda items. Yeah, go ahead.
I have two. One is in response to a request made by a gentleman here in the audience, Mr. Fuchs, to ask for, whoops, I'm losing my computer. He's advocating for, let me look here, asking essentially for a conversation between staff and some of the work that he's doing, and it has to do with clean water issues. So he's recommending a meeting with St. Croix County WCC delegates and interested county supervisors. So I don't know if that has to be on the agenda or if that's just something that can be acted on.
That sounds something that's more like an open house in that, the way that was worded. Am I hearing that? Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't think it's, open committee meeting type of meeting. I'd say that'd be something that would be done on the side, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you announced that there may be supervisors, but it's held one evening
Yep.
sometime and,
Yep.
yeah.
And, the Wisconsin Conservation Congress is a group that has members from St. Croix County, from every county on it. And they're petitioning resolutions to the Natural Resources Board for their consideration, so it's very similar to like the Citizen Deer Advisory Committee through the DNR. But that is really what they're doing, and yeah, and I think if there can be something that gets a little traction through that, maybe it'd be a good thing.
My second agenda item, and it's one I only know a little bit about, but I attended a conference where I learned about something called water quality certification that is available to ag producers in Minnesota. And I was wondering if that was something that staff could research and report on, what, if anything, we do here in Wisconsin.
Is that related to that, I guess, table we requested on things we could do
Yeah.
and the potential costs?
Yep, and it's called water quality certification, and it's for the producers. Okay, I don't know anything about that program. We did create a water quality matrix. We didn't have it done in time and that for the agenda packet.
Jason, we're getting a little outside of the future agenda items
Okay.
context right now. Mhm. I saw your face and I figured that was what it was. Yeah.
So I guess the big point in that is that, yes, we plan on having that water quality matrix on the June Community Development Committee meeting, and we could include a report or an update on the water quality certification.
Perfect. Anything else? Yes.
Once again, like the request that a future item has to do with the Chapter 15, the NMP, and getting signed, at least signed contracts, I'll use that word contract loosely, for where people are going to spread manure. I've been put in contact with a person who's doing a lot of investigative work, Danny Aikenson, a lot of work down with the dairy that's going down up in Spring Valley. That used to be the Richardson Dairy. It's the Breeze Hill, I think they call it now.
Yeah, so I guess summarize the future agenda item.
Okay, so anyway, he has some things to share with us that are eye-opening, and that is that part of the places where they had considered spreading or had said that they had the okay to spread manure were in St. Croix County, and they had no permission to spread there. So those are things that I think we've got to, we have to consider. We have to at least discuss it. I mean, if it doesn't go anyplace, that's fine, but we have to discuss it. So I'd like that put on.
That sounds like Chapter 11. You want that guy to come talk?
I can have this guy come and speak if you'd like. I can send you the information I have. I'll send it to Jason and he can
Yeah,
send it out.
why don't you do that?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay,
Okay, but put it on the agenda, please.
okay. Any, anything else? And then obviously as,
I've just got one, just
Yeah.
as an update. Supervisor Coner had requested conditional use permit training,
Mhm.
and I haven't been purposely holding that off the agenda, but I just wanted to make sure that we had a full committee when we had that training.
yeah,
So
yep,
if I know that we're gonna have a full house in June, we'll have it then.
yep. And then obviously as it's pertinent, I think we have, after 17, we have 2 ordinances left.
Chapter 16, hopefully.
Yeah, just one, okay. When the time comes, right?
Yeah. Both of them should be simpler amendments, though, like chapter 17.
Sure. Okay. All right, any announcements?
I've got some announcements for the committee. So the Glen Hills bathroom and entrance KIP project is finally starting to move along faster. The bathroom building, we received final inspection and occupancy on 3 of the, I'll call them stalls, last Friday. They're waiting on just a toilet part for the last one. So that should be all going for this weekend because the campground's over 3/4 full this weekend, so it's pretty good. The entrance building, we should get occupancy next week sometime. We're doing a punch list in the middle of next week. Depending on the rain and the weather, we're hoping to pave out there too, so that that project is really wrapping up. Definitely before Memorial Weekend and that, so that that's going. The Glen Lake Dam, I still am considering options for that. I found kind of a different type of firm. They're a dive team, and that we're looking at potentially going with, and that to help us and that free up the existing gate. And if not, their exploratory work will probably qualify us for the DNR's municipal grant program to help us with the cost of the gate replacement, if that's what it's gonna be. So it's sooner than later. I think that we're shooting for like the first week or 2 of June to do that work, so. And it does not involve draining down the lake more than 6 inches, so it'll be less than 6 inches, so. Also, I attended the Wiki Spring bike meeting and that to talk about Eckert and to talk about the Highway 35 trail project. Pretty good attendance there, probably over 40 or right around 40. And then yesterday I attended the St. Croix Bike and Ped meeting. Bob Gunther was also there, and that from the village of Somerset, and we were talking about Highway 35 trails and Eckert Park and stuff. So again, going back to try to nurture those partnerships with the bike associations. We got some signage that we worked on with them that'll be going on the Loop Trail, and that is basically trail etiquette and how to be decent people and trail users. So that's really what it boils down to. Amish enforcement, we're still going great guns on that. We had a status hearing For the Amish Schoolhouse Sanitary, Judge Nordstrand took and set that for trial. I believe it's July 7th. And then also we had first appearance in that for one of the Amish on another citation that we issued for a general store yesterday. And so we're working on that one as well. We've got 3 other sanitary violations and that from the Amish community that'll be addressed with citations if they're not actively pursuing permits, and that the first week in June. So just using our enforcement policy, that's kind of how everything's falling and that. But Heather's office in that, Julie Weber, has been really great. We've got plenty of court counsel support for these administrative actions. Those are just the Amish ones. We've currently got 2 other citations or court cases going. And then on the first week of June there, we've got 2 other ones that are non-Amish and that could get started. So we're really hoping that the citations just get people to comply. And if they comply, then we dismiss that citation. So that's all I've got.
All right. Date of the next meeting is June 19th, 2025. We'll see you all, well, at the county board meeting, I suppose, before then, but we are adjourned.
Yeah,
I have a quick question for you and Heather.
Sure.
Chapter 17.
sure. Yep.